Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to part 3 of a 4-part video series when it comes to Auth.js version 5. In this video, we are going to go over callbacks, which are asynchronous functions you can use to control what happens when an action is performed. The 4 callbacks we are going to go over are the SignIn, redirect, JWT, and session callback. The JWT and session callback are super powerful, and in this case, you can add data to your session object whenever a session is checked by passing it through a JWT payload, which I'm going to show you in this video. So if this sounds interesting to you, hit that like button and also subscribe for more content just like this. But other than that, let's get started. So Auth.js has callbacks, and these are going to be asynchronous functions that you can use to control what happens when a certain action is performed. And there are 4 callbacks, and those are going to be the SignIn, the redirect, the JWT, and the session callback. First, we are going to go over the JWT callback and the session callback. And the reason why is because I think these are the most important callbacks out of the 4. So if we scroll down to the JWT callback, what this is, it is called whenever a JSON web token is created. So if you look inside of your code, right? And if you never defined the session strategy as JWT, if you defined it as database instead, you can't use the JWT callback because there's going to be no JSON web token that's created. And you're probably wondering, when are the JSON web tokens created? Well, they're created anytime you sign in or whenever you check the session based off of the auth method. So that auth method, if we look at the code again, is what we're exporting here. So this is how you authenticate a user, and you can use this method anywhere throughout your code, because we're exporting it within the auth.ts file. So like I said, anytime you sign in or you check the session, the JWT callback will be called and a JSON web token is created to authenticate the user. We will be defining the JWT callback inside of your auth.ts file. So this is where all of your callbacks are going to be defined. And the JWT callback goes hand in hand with the session callback. And the reason being is because any payload that you pass into your JWT, your JSON web token, you can actually pass it into your session object. So if you look inside of the code real quick, and let's say, for example, we decide to log in, right? So let's log in real quick. And when we log in, I'm going to log in and I'm going to go to the dashboard page. So I'm logged in. If I go to the dashboard page and then we are console logging the session, right? You could look inside the session, and as you can see right here, we have the email, image, and name. It's only returning 3 properties of the user. So there's a lot of people asking, how can I add more properties to the user? Well, the way you do that is you pass a payload into the JWT, and then we can pass this payload into the session object. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do this with these callbacks. And I have a little diagram as well showing you kind of the flow of how the JWT and the session go hand in hand. So if we look here, the user is going to sign in with the credentials provider or the Google provider, and then a JSON web token is going to be created, right? And after the token is created, this is going to call the JWT callback function, where we could run any logic we need in order to add payload to the JSON web token. So then after that, you can add the data to the JSON web token to expose it to the client side, which is the session object that I just showed you in the console. And then the user, in our case, is going to get redirected to the dashboard after they sign in. And then when they get redirected to the dashboard, we're using the auth method, and all we're doing right now is console logging the authenticated user to show that they're actually logged in. And then after you check a session, the JWT callback is called again. So those are the only 2 times it'll be called. And then when you check a session, the session callback is going to be called as well. So this is going to be the step where you can pass the JWT payload into the session object. And then anything added to the JSON web token is automatically added to the user data. So this is going to be the flow of how we are going to work with the JWT and the session callback. Now looking at the example they have on the documentation, the JWT callback takes in a few arguments, and that's going to be the token, the account, and the profile. What you can do is you can console log all 3 of these, and then the console will commit once you sign in or check the session, because this is when this callback is called. All we're going to be using is the token. So I'm going to pass this in as an argument, and I'm going to console log the token. So if we go to the code, we're just going to define callbacks here, and it's going to be an object. And the first one is going to be async JWT. And then what we can pass inside of here is the token, right? So we have token, and then we can console.log, and then we can put JWT token, and we're still getting an error. And the reason why is because all we have to do is just click return token, and then the error should go away. So now I'm going to log out, or I could check the session, and then we could see this console log here inside of our server terminal here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the development. I'm going to refresh the dashboard page, and it should have checked the session. So that means the JWT callback should have been called. So if we look, as you can see, we do get a console of the JWT, right? So this is the JWT. This is what's inside of it: the name, email, pictures, the ID, which is the MongoDB ID, the issued at time, the expiration, and then another pretty much unique identifier for the JWT token. So this is all on the server side, all of this code. And then as you can see, the user is the stuff that is going to be appended to the session object, which is going to be exposed to the client. So we could actually share the user details with the user when they log in. So for example, you might use this on like a dashboard page or a settings page. So we want to add more of the JWT payload into the user, right? So as you can see, that is what you get when you console log the token within the JWT asynchronous function. Now what I want to do is I want to create a few functions outside of this file to get more information from our database. So from the account model and also the user model. So to do this, I'm going to create a new folder on the root layer. Not right there. Let's create one on the root layer. We're going to call this data. And inside of that, the first one I'm going to do is an account.ts file. And inside of this, we are just going to use the Prisma client. So if you remember, we go here in the Prisma, the folder, and look at Prisma TS. We're exporting it as Prisma. So that's how we could use the client. So we're going to import it from that file. Make sure it's from that file path. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do export const. Then we can say get account by user ID. So we are going to query our database, and we are going to pass in the user ID. And you're going to see exactly how we're going to get this, and that is going to be a type string. So the user ID is going to be the ID based off the MongoDB ID. So we're going to say const account equals await Prisma dot. We have the account model. So if we look at our schema.prisma, we have this account model. So that's why we have dot account. Or you could do this as well. So you could do Prisma dot, and then you could see the available models that you can use. So we have account and user. So we're going to do account dot find first. And in this find first, we're going to use the where, and then we're going to do where user ID. That's all we need. Or you could do user ID and then semicolon user ID like that. And then we're just going to return the account. So this variable right here. And we could put this in a try catch as well if we wanted. So try catch. Let's just move this up into the try. And let's just do a console.log. We could do error, and then we could also return null. So this is going to be a function to get the user ID from the database and also get the information if they have an account with us, which if they have an account with us, that means that they signed in with the Google provider, right? So the only way you get this model associated with your user is if you signed in with the Google model. That's going to be very important on what we're going to do here in the next few steps. The next utility function that we need to create is going to be getting the user by the ID. So to do that, we can do it in the same folder of data. We'll create a new file called user.ts. And let's import the Prisma client, which is coming from that specific file we created. Let's export a function, export const get user by ID. So this is getting the user by ID. So this means they don't have to have a Google provider account associated with them. So we're just going to pass the ID in, and that's going to be as a string. And then inside of this function, let's do a try catch. And let's query our database. So we're going to say const user equals await. And then we're going to say prisma dot user dot find unique. So as you can see, the difference is we're using the user model for this and the account model for the other one. And then we're just going to say where, and then this is just going to be ID like that. Or you could do it like this. It doesn't matter. Either way, they're the same thing. And then what we're going to do here is we're just going to return the user. So everything inside of the user, we're going to return it. And then what we could do here is we could just console.log an error and then return null. So these are going to be the two utility functions used inside of our asynchronous JWT callback, right? So now what we can do is, now that we console log the token and then it's still here in the console, as you can see, here's the different properties associated with it. And if we do look at the sub, which is the JWT.sub, right? Or it's going to be the token.sub. That's exactly what it's going to be. If we go to our MongoDB database, and if we actually, let's refresh this and let's browse the collection real quick. If we browse the collection and then we actually look at the user and we look at the MongoDB ID, so it's 676991, right? If we go back, 676991. So this token.sub is going to be the MongoDB underscore ID. So that underscore ID field inside of MongoDB is the same as your token.sub. So what we're going to do here, we could leave the console, we could remove the console because it might just give us unnecessary stuff, which we don't need anymore. We're going to say if there is no token.sub, even though we know there is now since we consoled it, we are going to return the token straight up. Right off the bat, we're going to just return the token. Next is, now we could see if there's an existing user, right? So let's do const existing user in that variable, and we're going to say await. And then we want to see if there's an existing user by using that utility function we created. So get user by ID. And what we can pass them for the ID is the token.sub, right? Because that is the MongoDB ID. And then we could put if there is no existing user, then all we have to do is return the token. You always have to return the token, okay? To make sure that this callback is completed. So after we return the token, let me just space this out a little bit so you guys could see it a little better visually. After we do that, what we are going to do is now we can see about the existing account, see if they have an existing account, which means they logged in with the Google provider, right? So we're going to say const existing account equals await get account by user ID. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the existing user dot ID. Okay, so if you hover over the existing user, that we are getting this from our database, we're getting the ID, the name, the email, email verified, password, image, created at, and updated at. So as you can see, we are just using the ID here to see if we could get the account by user ID. And now we are getting the existing account, which is everything inside of the account model. So as you can see, we get the provider, what provider they logged in with. So if you have multiple providers like GitHub and Google, this will be a different value. But for us, this is always going to be provider as Google, right? So now what we can do is we could append some of these values onto our token. And to do that, we can do, first one I like doing is token.isOauth. So it's going to be isOauth. I'm creating this field myself, right? So isOauth means if they are authenticated with a provider like Google or GitHub, not if they logged in with their credentials. So there's going to be a big reason why I'm doing this, because in the sign up or sign in callback, you're going to need this so you can actually see if the user logged in and how they logged in. So we're going to do this, and we're going to say token is OAuth if there is an existing account. So if there is an existing account, if this is true, we are going to say token is auth is equal to true. So this value is going to be true. Next, we can store the token.name. It's going to equal the existing user.name. And the reason why you do this is because if you update the name in the database, which is going to be the existing user field, you can always append it to the token, and then you could change the name within the session object. I don't recommend allowing people to change their name if they logged in with a Google provider, because that should be always by default based off their Google account. But if you do have a page, like a settings page where they could update their name, their email, their picture on their account, they should only be able to do that with the credentials provider, which this is a reason why we're going to have this field as well. And if they do update their name, this is how we're going to be able to update it through the session object. And the reason why we want to use the session object as much as we can is because you don't want to keep querying your database just to receive their name. So this is the best way to do it and most efficient. So also the token.email is going to equal the existing user.email. And then the token.image is going to equal the existing user.image. Okay. So now we have these fields appended to the token. And what we're doing is we are returning the token. That's all we're doing. So after this, if we go back to our documentation of the callbacks, if you look inside of the session callback now, so now we're done with the JWT, the session callback is called whenever a session is checked. By default, only a subset of the token is returned for increased security. So that name, email, and image, that's the only thing was sent back. It's because of increased security and they don't want to send stuff to the client that you don't want to be sent to the client. But you can always add more to the session. So for example, if you want to make something available, you add it to the token, like the access token and user ID from the above JWT callback, you have to explicitly forward it here to make it available to the client. So I'm going to show you exactly how you should do that, okay? And it kind of gives you an example on how you should do it. Obviously, my syntax is going to be a little different, but like I said, we appended this new field token.isAuth to the token. So now after the JWT callback is called, what we can do is we can have a comma here and we can put async session. And then the arguments that are going to get passed inside of the session are going to be the token and the session objects like that. And then what we do here inside of the code block is all you have to do just so this doesn't throw an error is return the session. And then what we can do here is we can also console log both the token and the session. So let's do token. And let's just do session token like this and console the value. And then let's just do session object and let's just console.log the session. Okay, and then let me just remove the other console from the JWT, which I did. And now we're going to console log these, and these consoles should run when we check to make sure the user is authenticated by using the auth method. And we're doing that inside of the database. So if you remember, if we go to the dashboard, if we are authenticating the user in the dashboard and just console logging the session. So that means our JWT callback is going to be called and the session callback is going to be called when we land on the dashboard page. So if we go back to localhost 3000, let's refresh the page. Okay. And as you can see, I'm on Next.js 15. So it is also showing me the server logs here. I know most of you probably don't have the newer version. So I'm just going to check over here in the actual server logs. Let me scroll down. Obviously it's throwing errors because as I'm typing, there's going to be errors and then it's going to fix itself when I'm done. But as you can see, the session token, right? Look what's on the session token now. Is OAuth as true, right? So we added that to the token object inside of the JWT callback. And then the session callback actually takes all of that token payload and uses it inside of the session object. So now it's on the token, right, of the session. And then as you can see, the session object still only has those three properties, which are name, email, and image. So now if you want to use the isOAuth as true inside of your session object, I'm going to show you exactly how we could do that. So let's minimize this. Let's remove these consoles. And I recommend definitely console logging your arguments like token and session. And if you're wondering where I'm getting these tokens and sessions, if you look inside of the documentation, you can see all of the arguments that can be passed in inside of the documentation: session, token, user. And let's go back to the code and show you how we can update the session object inside of the session callback. So what we can do here, let's remove this return session. We could return, and let's do an object, and we are going to spread through everything in these sessions. So those are the 3 properties, right? And then what we can do here is we could do the user. So it's going to be the user field. And then the user is going to be everything in the .session.user, like this. And then what we could pass here is if you want to pass the ID. So for example, this ID with this sub, it will be ID token.sub. So that is going to be now in the session user object. Okay. Now also too, you could pass is auth and then token.isOauth. And then also too, if you wanted to pass the name, it would be the token.name. So if you want them to update the name, you got to pass the name. Same thing with the email. But since we're not updating it, it's going to be the same email and name as the session object already. So I'm just going to remove these for now. But you kind of get the point. So if you want to append anything to your session object, you're going to do it like this. And as you can see, we are returning the session, so we're not getting any errors thrown at us. So this is all you need for the session callback and the JWT callback. So now let's actually see if these got appended to the session object inside of our console. So let's go back to the dashboard. Let's refresh the page and let's look at the user. And as you can see now, the user has an email, an ID, an image, is OAuth true, and a name. So instead of having just those 3 fields, now we have 5. So we were able to add 2 fields to it and make the session object bigger and your application more dynamic and better for the end user's experience. So that is the main things you do when it comes to the session callback and JWT callback. Those are the main functionalities that you can use for those 2 callbacks. And the third callback I do want to go over is the SignIn callback. And I feel like these 3 callbacks are going to be the ones you use the most. So these are the 3 that we're going to go over in this specific video. And if you guys who have any questions or are confused, leave a comment down below in the comment section and I will answer you as soon as possible, or join my Discord room. There will be a link in the description to join, and you could join about 400 to 500 other developers at the moment, and you guys could ask each other questions or me questions as well. So let's go back to our code and let's create the last callback function. And the last callback function is going to be the SignIn callback. So I'm just going to do it right above here. So what I'm going to do is async, and we're going to call this SignIn. And this SignIn function, if we look at the code, so let me just put this code block real quick and a comma. If we go in the documentation, go to the SignIn callback. This is going to be called if the user is allowed to sign in or not. So this is going to be called pretty much when the user tries to sign in. Pretty much the name gives it away, right? And these are the different arguments you could pass within the SignIn callback function. And the ones I'm going to pass in are just going to be the user and account. And obviously, if you want to pass these all in and console log, you can to see exactly what properties it's giving you back. But all we're going to do is the user and account. So let's go back and let's pass in the user and the account. And I'm not going to console log these right now, but if you do, just do exactly what I did for the JWT in the session. You console log and see what you get for the user account. But for us, we want to make sure that the user actually verify their email address before signing in. So this is only going to apply for the credentials provider, right? Because if you signed in with the Google account, you do not have to verify your email. The email is already verified through Google. So that is exactly why I added this is OAuth field to the session and token, right? Because we're going to use this here. When we're not going to use this here, we're going to use something similar to here, pretty much saying if the user was able to log in based if they have a Google provider or the credentials provider. So what we can do here is we can do an if statement. So we can say if account, and then if you do a dot, you can see everything that's associated with this account object, right? And what we have is provider. And if you wanted to, you could console log it and see what you get. So we're going to say if the account provider is going to not equal, let's do a not equal instead. So instead of equal, we're going to say doesn't equal, and it's going to be the credentials, right? So that's going to be what we're going to have. All we're going to do is return true. So the sign-in callback is either going to return true or false. If it returns true, that means you're allowed to sign in. If it returns false, that means you can't sign in. So we're going to, if the provider is not the credential provider, which means it's the Google provider, they're allowed to sign in, which means return true. Next, we are going to say const existing user is going to equal await get user by ID. And what we're going to pass in here is the user.id. And it's saying argument of type string or undefined is not assignable. So what we can do here is you could do an if statement. If there is no user.id, then what we can do is we could just return false. Right? Just like that. Or you could do it this way too, which isn't recommended, but we could just do it for this video. Or it's just going to be an empty string like that. So next is we are going to prevent the user from signing in if they didn't verify their email, right? So there is a field inside of our database. If we go to our database, I don't think I have a user. Oh yeah, email verified, null, right? So that means if they've signed in with the credentials provider and they don't have the email.verified, they're not going to be able to sign in. So to do that, what we can do is we're going to say if there is no existing user.email verified. So that means if they haven't verified their email address, what we can do here is we can return false. So this isn't going to allow them to sign in. So if they didn't verify the email address, they are not going to be able to sign in. And other than that, we do have to return true. So we get rid of this error at the top after all of these if statements. So let's go over this sign in callback really quick again. So we're going to say if the account.provider doesn't equal the credentials, which means it's the Google provider, you're just going to be logged in automatically, right? So if you sign in with Google, you don't have to go through any of these checks. You're just going to sign in. Next, we are going to fetch the existing user by passing in the user.id to our utility function we created 15 minutes ago. And then we are going to get the existing user with all of its properties, right? And what we're going to do is we are going to see if there is an email verified property. So if there's none, we are going to return false. Other than that, it's going to return true. So that means they're going to be logged in. So this is going to prevent people from signing in who haven't verified their email. And then what you can do from here is you could throw errors and error messages saying, hey, you need to verify your email before signing in. And to show the error messages, depending on if they could sign in or not, is if you go into your login action, which we created in part 2 of our video series, which is the video before this, we have a try catch where we are trying to sign in with the credentials provider, right? And the catch, so this means if an error is thrown, we could put if error instance of is of auth error. So this is a type from next-auth. If that is going to be a switch, so we did a switch JavaScript syntax here. And what we did is the error.type. So what you can do is you could do a switch and then you could console.log the error.type, or you just console.log the error, either one, whatever you need to do. And you could do it above this. And we put if the error, right, is of credential sign-in, we're just going to put return an error of invalid credentials. And then we could display this string on the front end, right? Or by default, it's just going to say return error, please confirm your email address. And how you can display errors based on the error message is just console.log the error of this auth error and see what you're receiving, or you can actually see the error inside of the URL. So the error will display here in the URL with the code. So the code could be credential sign-in error. It could be account already exists. I mean, obviously copy the code from up here in the URL that you're receiving, and then do something like a switch case where you can put the code in here and then return the error based on the code you're receiving. So this is how you could display error codes when trying to log in based off the sign-in process. So again, these are the 3 major callbacks that you need when it comes to Auth.js. These are very important to use, and it makes your code that much better and authentication system as well. So if you guys do have any questions, like I said, leave them in the comment section below and I'll get to them as soon as possible. But if you did learn anything or get any value out of this video, I'd really appreciate it if you guys can hit that like button and also subscribe for more content just like this. That would be greatly appreciated. It definitely motivates me when I get a lot more interactions and subscribers when it comes to YouTube to post more content. But other than that, hope you guys have a great day and happy coding.